So you guys, this is financial aid information that's really important as you're going through this college application process. So please, please, please give Mr. Alvarez your undivided attention. Please make sure you sign in for attendance for your QR code, otherwise you will be marked absent. So he is going to do the financial aid presentation, and then we have a couple surveys afterwards for you. So please put your phones away, take your earbuds out, and give Mr. Alvarez your undivided attention. Thank you.
We're good to go. All right, good morning, everyone. I know it's really early in the morning. I know this information isn't going to be quite the most entertaining thing, at least part of the process. You have a lot of applications and a lot of information that will be put in front of you. But regardless, I just want to thank you all for taking some time out of your day, for joining us today. And let's learn a little bit. All right, so first and foremost, I don't know if anyone knows who exactly we are at the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. It's our goal to provide Illinois students with information and assistance to help education beyond high school accessible and affordable. All right, so the process. Before we start, a lot of times, many of us think of college as a four-year university right off the bat. But we at the Illinois Student Assistance Commission define college as a little bit more than that. For those of us that don't really want to pursue something of interest at a four-year university, there's going to be a lot more options for you. We have a vocational, a two-year school, an associate's degree, a bachelor's, and even beyond that would be a master's. It's going to be any institution really that's a post-secondary education beyond your high school. But what's the value of a degree before we even get into the financial aid aspect of it? Really, for me, the most important part is not so much that the average salary goes up the more education one receives, but rather that the unemployment rate continues to decrease the more education one receives. But planning for college can be a lot of confusion for many students, whether you're first generation, second generation, or beyond. So a lot of the most common questions that we're going to answer today is going to be, can I afford college? How much is it going to cost? What is financial aid exactly? What is a FAFSA or alternative application? When and how do I apply, and where can I get help? And that last one tends to be the one that we hear the most. So financial aid is the first question we're going to answer, and it's going to be money that is borrowed, given, or earned. Right? It's going to be obtained through various sources. It's going to make college more affordable for you, whether that's through scholarships, grants, loans, or anything of the like. And for us, we mostly want you to take away from this. It's going to be, if you think you can't afford college, think again. And we're going to talk about a lot of different ways that you can afford to pay for it. All right, so financial aid. Financial aid is going to be separated into two main categories, being gift aid and then self-help aid. Gift aid is pretty much just going to fall under grants and scholarships. So grants are going to be need-based money that tends to come from either the federal government or the state government. Scholarships are going to be a little bit more, they're going to vary from range to range. A lot of times we're pretty much just going to be coming from private sources. But at the same time, we're also looking at institutional scholarships, whether that be from the college specifically or the institution as a whole. And then self-help aid. One of the most common misconceptions we see from a lot of students and families is the fact that loans are a part of the financial aid process. And at the end of this, whenever we're wrapping up from the year, because most of this won't really wrap up until January, February, all the way heading into May. Whenever we receive those award letters, right, which is the college packaging you, telling you exactly how much it takes to afford to go to that school and how much aid you're going to receive, loans are going to be on there. And so when we start to compare those financial aid award letters, and we're saying, well, hey, this loan specifically, or we're receiving quite a bit of money from this one school, but the majority of that money tends to be loans, you may want to reconsider. And then work study. All right, so work study, we're actually going to go into a lot more detail. Work study is going to be a federal-run program that an institution has to participate in and that you actually have to opt in. So whenever you're completing the FAFSA, we'll talk about what exactly that is in just a second. Sorry, for some reason my mouth's really dry today. So the FAFSA itself is going to be an application that the majority of you will be completing that will be opening up on October 1st at midnight. So Friday, all right, we're getting pretty close to it. The FAFSA will be the first requirement for this, and you must complete it, and you'll be asked whether you want to even be considered for it. You'll get 3 options, yes, no, I don't know. At the bare minimum, I ask that you select yes, because at the end of the day, you don't have to participate in this. This isn't something that you can say, okay, well, I said yes, I have to. No, it's at the end of the day, this is a job, essentially. It's a part-time job that many of us will end up having regardless while we throughout our time in school. And what many students may not know is that any money you make outside of this program, after we cross a certain threshold, can start to have an impact on your financial aid. Now, it's a little bit of a higher monetary value than the majority of us will make throughout our time in school, because most of us will just be working part-time, because our main goal should be to finish our school, right? So focus on your education, make sure you're passing your classes, all that kind of good stuff. It is considered a part of a self-help aid because you have to earn this money. So it's a job, right? If you are selected, it's a need-based program. If you're selected, you have to go in, apply for the job. That has to be considered under a work study and actually work that job. Now, what's the benefit of this? This is one of those programs I personally like, and here's why. This is a very flexible job. The majority of us, if we have ever had a job in our life, know that when you're at work, you kind of just have to do whatever it is required of us, whether that be restocking or whether that be doing something of manual labor. But most of these tend to allow you to work on your homework, do your essays that you need to be working on, study for your exams, anything of the like, and then you're still getting paid for it. So I don't know about y'all, but at minimum, I would love to be able to do anything I would like for the most part and still be earning some money. So this flexibility allows you to participate in this. The flexibility of this job is one of the biggest benefits. And whenever you're filling out your FAFSA for the following year, it's not going to impact you. If anything, it'll reduce you and actually have plenty of benefits. So one of the other benefits of this is that you don't actually have to go to this job if you really don't need to. You're not going to earn the funds, but it's not going to have a negative impact on you. All right, but sources of financial aid. So the largest source of financial aid is going to come from the Department of Education, right, which is the federal government. In the state of Illinois, it's the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, so that'd be the agency I work for. College is going to be your institution. This is going to range from all the community colleges that you would apply for, all the four-year universities, anything of the like. And then outside private sources is pretty much anything outside of the big three, right? So anything from churches, organizations, CBOs, private sources, anything outside of the big three will be considered a private source. And why do we need to be aware of that? Why do we even need to know about them? So for the federal government and state government, for some of these programs, you're going to have limits on what you can use this money for, right? So for the Illinois, we'll talk about the MAP grant in just a second, but the MAP grant can only be used for tuition and fees. So the money, you won't even see the money, it'll just go directly paid toward that bill, versus the Pell Grant that we'll talk about in just a second. But before that, let me introduce you to the big two. Right? In Illinois, you have the Illinois Student Assistance Commission and the Department of Education. If you receive anything from either of these two agencies, I highly recommend that you read thoroughly through it. And please, please, please check your emails. From now to the time you're graduating, even after we enter the workforce, most of us will not receive any phone calls or even letters anymore. Emails are going to be the primary source of communication for the majority of industries these days. So please do check those. This will be your school email, especially if you've already been accepted into a school and we already set one of those up. You may receive something from your financial aid office, even regarding scholarships that they may want you to be aware of. All right, so the big grants. All right, so we talked a little bit about the sources of financial aid. We're going to start to get into the actual money that they distribute. So the MAP grant can only be used in the state of Illinois. That's the first thing. That's why we need to be aware of where this money is coming from. The MAP grant is going to be a need-based grant that can only be used at MAP-approved schools within the state and can only be used for tuition and fees. Now, unlike in other states, this can only, in other states, some states will allow their grants to be used after the Pell Grant is applied. In Illinois, the MAP grant's applied first. So any money received on top of that will be applied to different things, and some of it can even be returned to you, but this one will always be first. Now again, if we choose to leave the state and we qualify for this, we forfeit the money. So that's the first thing we should be aware of. The Pell Grant's very different. The Pell Grant comes from the Department of Education, has a lot more flexibility in that it can be used for tuition and fees, books, supplies, anything of the like, even cost of living. So, if we were to receive the total amount of this, right, again, both of these are going to be need-based, we can receive up to $12,000. All right, so remember that those was gift aid, so that would be money you don't have to repay. But that's not the only thing that we distribute every year. Now, the IVG, ING, and the grant for the dependents of police, fire, and correctional officers, those are going to be separate applications, but it's also something we don't really have too much time for. So if we do think that one of these is applicable to you, we can talk afterwards. You can shoot me an email. We can kind of discuss it. Those are also very specific criteria that one must be met. But the MTI and the SETTW are going to be more for the general population. This will be for anyone that really has an interest in pursuing a career in education after their graduation. So the other thing we have to remember is that there are certain restrictions when it comes to where this money is coming from. So for the state, because it's coming from us, you can only receive one of the two. So for anyone that wants to pursue a degree in education and wants to apply for the MTI, you can only receive the MTI, right? If we want to go into specifically special education, but we qualify for the MTI, you can only choose one or the other. But that doesn't mean that you can't receive another one. We like to talk about where this money is coming from because we want to give you the opportunity to stack. Right? Stack just means dipping into different sources and trying to capitalize on all the money that one can receive because, again, this is money that you don't have to repay. So we've talked about the Pell Grant a little bit. The Teach Grant, on the other hand, is something you can stack. Right? So, again, this is only for students who are going to be pursuing some form of career in education. The other thing about it is that the Teach Grant, right, with the maximum up to $3,772, and the MTI and the SATGW have something that's known as a requirement that after you receive this money, should you not go into education and teach for a certain number of years, that free money in the form of gift aid, in the form of grants and scholarships, turns into a loan. So if at the end of it we've received our degree, we decide that wasn't for us, all of that money that we would have received now has to be repaid, right? Because it's set up for a certain specific demographic to pretty much bring more teachers into the workforce. So the FACOG is going to be another form of grant that another grant that comes from the Department of Education. And you will see this on there for some of you. It's also need-based, but the other thing is this comes from the Department of Education. Students tend to get confused because it actually is distributed by the institution. So that's where things can get a little bit confusing. So if you see that acronym of FACOG, just know it's coming from the Department of Education and will likely have some form of restrictions on it. Unlike institutional money that tends to just be, here you go, you can use it for a certain number of things or pretty much anything you'd like. If it gets returned to you, just make sure it's going towards something related to your education. And then the further work study, which we've already talked about at length. All right, loans. This is where I think I tend to lose both students and parents because no one really likes to think about loans. But loans are a part of the process. Now, for the purpose of this presentation, we're pretty much only going to be focusing on Department of Education loans, right, or federal loans. The reason for that is because private loans can vary from, pretty much a huge range of high interest rates, quick repayments, long repayment plans, all that kind of good stuff. And that can get very, very confusing. So we'd like to focus on this because it's very straightforward. So the main thing we need to be aware of is the source of the loan, right? This one primarily will cover the Department of Education, but if you do take out the loan, just be aware of who owns the loan. Subsidized versus unsubsidized, which is only federal. The interest rate, which is a pretty common thing. And then repayment options and grace period. Now, before I talk to you about subsidized versus unsubsidized, let's go for grace period. Grace period is a great opportunity for students to it's something that students should be aware of because whenever you take out a loan, first and foremost, we should be aware that we're going to have to repay this money at some point. But a grace period allows the student to either find a job or come up with a plan to think about how they're going to begin repayment. So for grace periods, the most common one is going to be 6 months, but we'll get into that in just a second. Let's talk about subsidized versus unsubsidized first. All right, so this is going to be need-based. It's going to be the subsidized loan, and it does have a limit. We'll talk about what that is in just a second because it changes from freshman year all the way up to junior year. The interest is going to be paid by the federal government throughout the duration of your time in school at minimum while you're above half-time. Every institution can define half-time a little bit differently. Some may say it's 6, some may say it's 9. So you want to be aware of that, and you may even want to look into that if we do choose to pursue a part-time education while we kind of figure ourselves out as we enter school. The interest will also be paid for during the grace period, right? And again, the typical time is going to be 6 months. So if I, as a student, drop below half-time for one reason or another, I have 6 months to kind of begin repayment and figure out a plan to kind of repay that money. And then deferment. The thing about federal loans is that there are a lot of different benefits that one can have, and one of them is deferment, which is we haven't quite figured out a game plan. Maybe we're not making as much money as we need to. And so deferment allows us to kind of push that loan back, that payment back, without going into forbearance. And forbearance is kind of the last straw before you go into kind of a negative report on your credit. So unsubsidized loans. Unsubsidized loans are pretty much something everything will see, right? So if we don't see subsidized on there, but we're likely going to be unsubsidized. And these are going to be because they're not need-based. So regardless of your EFC, which will change in the upcoming years, the interest will begin to accumulate on this loan immediately after receiving it. But at the same time, you don't have to repay this loan until after graduation, or unless you drop below half-time and then 6 months after that. All right, so let's talk about the specific numbers of it. The interest rate has gone up a little bit from what it used to be. So it's now 3.73. It's at subsidized, unsubsidized, and both of those will have a 6-month grace period. So 6 months to begin repayment after you graduate or if you drop below half-time. But we haven't talked about is the Parent Plus, and we haven't talked about whose name this is going to be under. So one thing we should be aware of is that the direct subsidized and direct subsidized are going to be in our name, right, as the student. It won't affect our parents, and that tends to be a topic of conversation that tends to come up as well. You should be aware of that you as a student are primarily responsible in the eyes of the Department of Education and in the educational system to pay for your school, right? This is your education. This is going to be your degree. This will be to your benefit. So why do I need to be aware of that? Because should something happen, you will be the one responsible for repaying this money, right? And that's why we want you to be aware of this, because at the end of the day, this will have an impact in one way or another on your future. But the Direct Plus is a little bit different. It's not need-based, it's going to be credit-based, and it will be in the name of your parents. And your parents actually have to complete an application for this loan. So the limit on that one's going to be very different, and it's going to range, right? But you will never receive more financial aid than the cost of attendance to attend a school, right? So if a school costs $30,000, costs 10, 13, whatever the number is, you're not going to receive any more financial aid than you need. And unlike the other two, you don't have 6 months. You have 60 days. Again, this isn't on the name of your parent, in the name of your parent. So they'll have 60 days from the last payment disbursement to begin repayment. Now there are some options with this to defer it all the way back to when you graduate, to where you drop below half-time, but that's something that they have to do outside of just the original application. But there's maximum loans. Remember that I talked about you're not going to receive any more financial aid than you need. The first one's going to be that every year you're only going to be allowed to take out a certain amount of federal loans. For your first year, it's going to be $5,500, and then they're going to give you $1,000 more or offer you $1,000 more every year to kind of incentivize you to continue and finish off your education. But we're going to notice two things here. The first thing that comes to mind with some parents and students is that you see dependents and independents. The majority of you, right off the bat, will be considered dependents because you're below the age of 24. Now, there are 7 other questions that you can answer yes to that would grant you independence, but the majority of you will not. So, for that sake, I just wanted to just kind of explain that, because there's a difference, because as an independent student, you would qualify for a higher amount of loans, right, because it's just you. So with dependents, there's also a maximum that you can take out in the form of subsidized, which is, again, the one where your interest is paid for throughout your time in school. So right off the bat, we've already talked about the different loans and different grants, and maybe even some of the scholarships. But applying for them, there's going to be 3 ways, right? The majority of us will be completing the FAFSA, right, which is the free application for federal student aid. But if we don't qualify for the FAFSA, there's a different option, right, which is the alternative application. And lastly, if we don't qualify for that one as well, because there are criteria that must be met for that one as well, we have to go to other forms, which is going to be institutional applications that some will have that you have to complete. So for the FAFSA, since all of us are seniors here, this will be opening up for you coming Friday. Now, be aware there's going to be 2 applications open at pretty much all points throughout the year, and that's just because this application is open for an entire year. So it opens up on October 1st, which is Friday, and it'll be open for you, the one that you'll be completing, until next July, right? So not the one in the summer, but the following one. And that's because you can apply for this financial aid. It's open throughout the entirety of the year. But you're going to hear the first thing, and this is going to be a phrase you're probably going to get sick of hearing. It's apply as soon as possible on October 1st or after. The reason for that is money runs out from institutions to grants to scholarships. So if we're not aware of this and we qualify for either a grant or whether it's institutional money and that runs out, you won't get it. That's just the reality of it. It's going to be applied for state and federal financial aid programs, and some institutions, regardless of your EFC, will even use it to award institutional aid. Without completing it, this is the bare minimum. This is show up, right? If an institution sees that you would have been great to receive this institutional aid, but you didn't complete And this is separate from a scholarship, by the way. Scholarships are going to be an application on their own. If they see that you didn't complete something, that you're basically missing out on money that they probably could have given you, right, based on just your GPA, because you didn't do the bare minimum, right? They can easily give it to someone else because they don't have any information aside from you. They don't have any information from you at all, right, other than, again, the application that you submitted. And it's going to be free. One of the things you're going to see constantly is going to be so many websites, so many pamphlets saying pay us $50, $100, $150. This is a very lucrative industry that people try and capitalize on. So, but this application, it's free, right? So the alternative application. This application is intended for students who are undocumented or transgender who are not eligible to complete the FAFSA. So this is an application that's available to students to apply for state financial aid, and that's only available within the state of Illinois. So why is this, where do we complete this application? This application, again, will be on isac.org/alternative application. It can be completed in English or Spanish, same as the FAFSA. Now, again, some institutions will also use the information given to you that award institutional aid. So unlike the FAFSA, at the very end of it, once you complete it, you'll receive something that's known as an EFC, or Estimated Family Contribution. But we'll get into that in just a second. The alternative application will not give you such a thing, though. So you won't really know what amount they'll be using to determine what financial aid you qualify for, and we'll explain why in just a second. So October 1st, that's right around the corner. Again, it's Friday. If you try and complete on October 1st, you probably will be able to, but sometimes the system crashes, which it pretty much crashes every year. So don't freak out. You can complete Saturday, Sunday, so on. Anytime after October 1st, we just want you to complete it before Thanksgiving tends to be the sweet spot. So just please take some time to do it. It'll take you about 40 minutes. So this would be high school seniors and college students. So this application is cyclical. It's going to be using information from prior tax years. So throughout your time in college, you will also be completing it throughout your time in school. Now for this one, it'll be on FAFSA.gov and ISAC for the alternative application. And again, it's going to be used to determine eligibility, and some institutions will use it to award institutional aid, especially private universities. And again, because you as a student may be asking yourself, well, if I'm primarily responsible, he's mentioned something about tax information, but I don't really file taxes. And that's all right. Most of you will be considered dependents, so you're going to have to be including parental information. But only certain individuals will qualify as parents, regardless of how we know them as in their personal life. So it'll be biological, adoptive, or step-parents if they're married to a biological parent. Now, some of you may have special situations or circumstances, and we can discuss that privately to kind of address how you would fill this out. But no one else besides the above list will be able to provide their information for the FAFSA or the alternative application. Now, legal guardians are not going to be considered parents for the purposes of financial aid. And then for those of us who come from a family that's divorced or parents who are divorced and we split our time evenly, for those of you who are in a household where your parents are divorced, you're going to be reporting your information of whom you've spent the last 12 months with. But in the case we're unable to figure that out, we go on to who's providing more financial support, which can range from who bought your phone to all the way to who paid for your last haircut or anything in between. And lastly, if we're unable to figure that out, we pretty much just goes with which parent makes more money. All right, so for the FAFSA, again, because it'll be for a federal application, you must have a social security number to complete this application. But for students who come from mixed status families and their parents do not have a social for one reason or another, you can still complete this application. It's just you're going to be completing it a little bit differently. And your parents, when they ask you for a social security number, will enter complete zeros in that scenario. Now, for students who are qualified individuals who have an alien registration number, will simply put in their alien registration number, their social, when asked for it. Now, that FSA ID. That FSA ID, if you have not already created one, we highly recommend that you do so, because if you were to create it today, it would give you time for that FSA ID to process by Friday. But if we make it on Friday and maybe we don't have all the information we need, we have to wait until Monday or even all the way up until next Wednesday to complete this application, because it has to verify your identity, right? So if I make that FSA ID today, it'll take you about 20 minutes. It'll ask you for some personal information from your social, date of birth, to an email. And at this point, once we start entering information to any of these applications, because it's a part of the process, please be sure to use either a professional email and a non-school email, and that's because your colleges will actually see this information on there. All right, so the FSA ID. You as a student need one, your parent, only one of your parents need one if we come from a two-parent household. Now, any information that we need besides that, it's going to be federal tax returns, W-2s, other records of income, any bank statements regarding how much they have in investments, anything of the like. And lastly, you need at least one school to send your information to. If we're barely starting the process, we don't really know where we're going to go, I highly recommend you at least include either CLC as a safety net, as a safety school, which I think most of us will anyways, or we at least list the colleges that we think we're going to be applying to, and that's because your information has to go somewhere. If we don't include the college on there, they're not going to have our info. And the other reason we want you to complete it early is because, as I mentioned, most of this process won't really wrap up until May completely. And that's just because we want you to receive your financial aid award letters as soon as possible, because that's actually going to tell you, can I afford to go to this school, or is another school a better option for me? So that electronic signature I keep talking about, that's how you actually sign. Now, a long time ago, it used to be an application you actually had to fill out by hand. That's not the case anymore. It's still available to you, but it's very, very slow. This is how you'll sign at the very end of your application. If you sign as a student, you won't have to enter this information in, but this will be essentially your login for the next 2 to 4 years. Now, for parents who are unable to make an FSA ID, remember that only one parent has to make one if you come from a two-parent household. You're actually going to print a signature, what's known as a signature page. And so that signature page is essentially going to be a QR code or a QRS kind of code that's attached to your application. That's a printed out document that has all your information on there that your parents will just wet sign and mail into the Department of Education. Now, the issue that tends to arise with the signature page is that students will send out the signature page, but they won't actually submit their application. And if you do that and that signature page arrives and there's nothing to match it with, you have to start all over because it won't match, and you'll simply get a reject letter, which happened quite a few times last year for a bunch of students we work with. The alternative application is only available online, right? So unlike the FAFSA, you don't have to make an FSID because it doesn't require a social security number. And you're actually going to use a PIN. That PIN's going to remain the same for every year we're in school. So whenever you start this application, it will ask you some very general questions to kind of determine whether you qualify to apply for the alternative application. And if you are available, it'll ask you to create a profile. Then you'll be emailed the PIN from our agency. You won't be able to make your parents up until you're about halfway in the application when you ask for a parental email. If your parents don't have an email, and this goes for pretty much everyone, make one for them. And that's just because you're going to need at least 2 emails. So if you have to, you can go that route. But we recommend that your parents have one as well. All right, that DRT. This application's, I would say, somewhat straightforward. Both of them are. But where we start to get very confused is the financial section of it. This will make your life a whole lot easier. Assuming your parents are able to make an FSA ID, this pretty much pulls all of their tax information directly from the IRS. Now, not everyone's going to be able to use this tool, and it'll kind of tell you right off the bat if you qualify. For those parents who aren't able to make an FSA ID, you won't be able to use this. But if you're able to, this is the only time I'll ever recommend click a pop-up, and that's just because once you enter in your FSA ID, it'll say you're now leaving this website to go to the irs.gov. Are you sure you want to? Click yes, take you here, enter in your parents' information, and then transfer everything over so you don't have to deal with it. But that EFC I've mentioned a second ago, the FAFSA alternative application will generate a number called the EFC, but only one of them will show you what that EFC is, and that's going to be for the FAFSA. That EFC is basically kind of what determines any form of need-based aid, right? Anywhere from grants, and sometimes institutions will use this as to kind of determine who gets first dibs on some of their institutional aid, right? But they're the ones that are going to determine this information. It's the amount of a student can be expected to, it's the amount a family can be expected to contribute, not required, but expected to your education. And why does it matter? It's because, again, it's going to be used to determine your eligibility. Now, this is one of those processes that very few of you may be selected for, or maybe a good selection of you. This is a random process. So verification is going to be a process that you may be selected for that you have to complete. If you don't complete this and you receive any form of financial aid, you're not going to get anything. This process you can be selected for this process through every school you apply to and are accepted to. And that verification process can be somewhat tedious. And that's just because we actually have to get extra documents that we've already provided for. Now, because these institutions are responsible for that money, they have to verify that the information you've given them is correct. Only give them what they ask of you. if you as a student or as a parent are working throughout this together, if they ask you for one specific document, only give them that document because you're legally required to review anything you give them. And if you give them more, that causes other headaches. You can be delaying your packaging by roughly 2 months and sometimes even more, right? And that's because you have to complete this whole process for you to receive anything. But cost of attendance, how much it actually costs to go to school? There's going to be some negotiables and some non-negotiables, and those are going to be considered direct or indirect expenses. Tuition and fees are non-negotiable. You will be paying this. That's just the reality of it. But room and board, that's where we start to get into a little bit of gray area. And that's because room and board considered to be, we're either paying this directly to the school, or we can change this a little bit, right, by either living at home, cheaper apartment, anything of the like. And that's kind of how things start to change. But colleges use a lot of information that they've already gathered to determine how much it costs to attend their school. But this is a sticker price. Every school, if you were to look it up, will tell you they cost anywhere from like 4 to 10 to all the way to like $56,000 a year. Sometimes even more, but most people know it's the 50,000 club. There's quite a few schools, even in Illinois, that are part of that club, that you're not always going to pay that. And that's, again, just because you have direct and indirect expenses. But what most people don't understand is that there's going to be transportation, books and supplies, miscellaneous, all wrapped into that number, right? So when it says your cost of attendance will be X number, that X number is including all of this. So that's not exactly what you will be paying, but it's your sticker price of what it takes to attend that college. Now, as you break it down, and most schools will be pretty nice about it to explain to you, or at least show you what's tuition and fees, and then go on to explain everything else. That's how you start to say, okay, hey, I'm not going to be paying this, I'm going to be paying this actual number. But why is that important? The cost of attendance is going to change from school to school, and they're going to accept, the only thing that's going to change really is your EFC. Now, some of you will be seen and be aware of what the EFC is, so you can kind of get an idea of, all right, well, my EFC is really high. I'm not going to get anything in the form of grants, but I can apply for more scholarships, or I can apply for institutional aid that may be available to me, and that may be something I receive. And they use this information to determine your financial need. So the reality is that financial aid will not, in more cases than not, will not be able to cover 100% of your total cost of attendance, right? So in the forms of grants, loans, or scholarships, a lot of times you will still have a balance, right? That has to be either paid out of pocket or paid via loans. But at the end of the day, why is this all important? And it's because the financial need, right, as we can see from college A to college C, is going to be from $7,000 all the way to $32,000, because the EFC is at $3,000. But if I were to look at this and say, okay, hey, based on my financial need, it's probably likely that I'm going to go to college A because that's the most affordable to me, or that's, the smartest decision. But if I don't wait for that financial aid offer, for that letter to tell me exactly what I'm going to be receiving, and I choose just based off of what I've found, a lot of colleges will rush you to make a decision, or some will even say, hey, you've been accepted. Are you going to accept your offer? Most of them will have until May to give you to allow you that time to make that final decision. Wait until you have all the information available to you via these letters, right? Because at the end of the day, nothing will change past this, right? Unless there's a scholarship that you applied for that you're very confident that you're going to get. So, if you have issues deciphering what exactly is free money versus money that you're going to have to repay, we have a really nifty tool called Financial Aid Comparison Worksheet that will kind of allow you to make an educated decision on which school will be financially better for you, and that's why we ask you to encourage you to wait, but also complete your financial aid as early as possible so you can get packaged as early as possible, and be aware of priority deadlines. If a school says your priority deadline for application, they're also probably going to have a financial aid priority deadline, and you want to get your application in beforehand or before that deadline, just so that you can get priority and you can get your package done a lot faster. So, for some quick reminders as we wrap up this presentation, complete the application. This is the bare minimum, right? It takes you about 40 minutes of your time. If you need any help on any of this, we're here to help you and guide you through this process, whether it's the alternative application or the FAFSA. It'll open up on October 1st. All of this is going to be considered confidential because we're going to start using PI, or personal identifiable information. A lot of this can be traced back to you in one form or another. All of that's considered confidential, whether you're completing the FAFSA or the alternative application. If you are asked to submit extra documentation via verification, please do so as early as possible. And if you get confused by it at all, again, the financial aid office is there to help you and answer any questions. They're not trying to, gotcha kind of moment, but rather they're just trying to verify that the information is accurate because they're responsible for that money at the end of the day. Deadlines. As I mentioned, there's going to be priority, there's going to be general, and then there's going to be blast submission deadlines. Most colleges don't tend to really have those until spring, but they will have priority. So get in your applications, college and financial aid, two different things, in as soon as possible and before that if you can. And lastly, we may not be in the habit of keeping copies of everything. Most of us, whenever you get into the post world, I guess, whenever you get into like an adult life kind of thing, you tend to keep copies of everything, and that's just because things happen. We had a couple situations last year where colleges lost applications for one reason or another, and students had to submit copies of it or another form of documentation within like a 24 to 36 hour window. And that's just because they were trying to get them in before the priority deadline. If you have everything on hand already, it's a pretty simple thing, a pretty quick turnaround. Just say, all right, here's my stuff, where's my package, that kind of thing. And then reapply every year, right? So it's a cyclical application. So it's going to open up every October 1st. Just get it done. And lastly, a real quick review, not review, but a real quick, we'll just call that a real quick summary of the financial aid process is there on screen. But what I want you to be all aware of is respond to your offers, guys. At the end of the day, these colleges are going to say, hey, you've been accepted. If you have any pending thoughts, please let us know, that kind of thing. But it's either confirm or reject, right? Because the financial aid money is going to be tied up with you and can sometimes be used for other students. So if you know for a fact you're not going to go to that school, respond to them, please. And then renew your application. But some of you may be wondering, all right, well, what other resources out for me? Just because maybe this presentation wasn't everything we needed, maybe we still have a lot more questions. Heck, some of us may not even know what we want to study or what we want to go into. So we have a lot of this information on isacstudentportal.org. Pretty much anything from a scholarship search tool all the way up to financial aid education, money management for those of us who will be pretty much on our own after we graduate, and careers and jobs, right? So Illinois WorkNet does a great job of giving you an explanation of what career is going to take in forms of education requirements all the way up to expected salary, right? And that's information that they use on the daily. And then college planning tips. All right, so like as I mentioned, this is a very lucrative industry that some people want to capitalize on. So these are just some trusted websites to keep you out of those ones that try to charge you money, because again, there's so much free information out there. We want to make sure you save as much money as possible. And that can range from studentportal.isac.org, studentaid.gov, where you'll be completing the FSA ID, FAFSA.gov for the application, and then ISAC.org for such alternative application. For those of us who have questions outside of this presentation and aren't able to reach one of us or anything of the like, we also have a number you can text, right? Who doesn't like to text someone when it comes to just asking the question and actually being able to get a response? This is the real person, not a bot at the moment, where they'll answer your question from Monday through Friday from about 9 a.m. all the way up to about 5:30. And if you have a question, you can text us at literally any time, and we'll just get back to you during business hours. Lastly, my information, if you have any questions or have a special situation you'd like to address or anything of the like. Thank you all so much for your attention.
Alexis has a wealth of knowledge and information, so as you guys are filling out the FAFSA, please reach out to him. He will meet here at school. They do meet outside of school as well at like a Starbucks if you guys need. So if you have any questions, please be sure to ask. And again, one more round of applause for Mr. Alvarez.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys, just a reminder, Mrs. Piggott sent out information to you via Schoology, basically stating that you need to take the surveys, the panorama survey. So you guys need to hop on to Schoology or your email where she sent that message and take the panorama survey. So it gives you the code as well as using your 6-digit student ID number as your access code. So those do need to be completed as well. So during your lunch today or the rest of the day, please get those surveys filled out. You can start now. We do have about 2 minutes if you guys want to get started.